Honorable members, Dumelang, good morning. Goeiemorgen. Molweni. You are welcome to the Portfolio Committee meeting on international relations. Today we are going to be dealing with the main item, which is about African Renaissance Fund. I welcome the department and the staff that is accompanying the department to this important meeting. I also welcome the staff from the Parliament that is helping us as the Portfolio Committee to achieve our objective. Yesterday, we had the outgoing president of the US, Biden, indicating that
recording in progress.
Some peace agreement reached between Israel and Lebanon. We don't know whether that announcement regarding peace in that part of the world will be sustained. But I can say here and now that the chances of that peace agreement being adhered to are almost close to zero. And I'm saying this because when you look at the attitude and the behavior, the consistent behavior of Israel in as far as any effort of peace is concerned, the situation remains bleak as to whether they will adhere to that agreement or not. We saw yesterday that as soon as that announcement was made by President Biden, there was more bombing in that part of the world in Lebanon. Many people, many women, children, infrastructure continue to suffer under the onslaught of the Israeli might. People of Gaza, the same thing. But otherwise, we will wait cautiously to see whether that announcement indeed will be able to achieve its intended objective. Minister and your team, we have seen you go into FOCAC in China, which was very successful. And that FOCAC was followed by a conference of the BRICS countries, member states, which was also very successful. We received a report in the last meeting from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation regarding some of the agreements and way forward arrived at in as far as the BRICS is concerned, which was held in China. I mean, in Russia. So we want to congratulate you for making sure that you fly the flag of South Africa. We also saw you and the president and the rest of the collective going to Brazil, not only to participate in the G20 summit of Brazil, but also to make sure that the handover processes between us as the future chair in 2025 of the G20 and Brazil is handled smoothly and in a very responsible way. We have no doubt as South Africa that the G20 will be very successful next year because we know the capability of the leadership of the government of the Republic of South Africa. We are also hopeful that the G20 will be used to advance all the programs aimed at ameliorating the implications coming from poverty, inequality, and unemployment. So you have our support as the Portfolio Committee to ensure that South Africa succeeds to be the first host in the African continent of the G20. We know both the progressive and the complexities of the other G20 member states, which we will be receiving here as a country. And again, we hope that as a country, we'll look at every opportunity of those member states which are constituting the G20 to see what is it that we can advance progressively for the people of South Africa and for the people of Africa in general. So we welcome you, honorable members, today. Lobabalo, do we have apologies?
Good morning, Chair and honorable members. Yes, Chair, we do have 5 apologies, Chair. We have 3 apologies from the Minister and his deputies attending the Cabinet Committee meetings. And the second apology is from Honorable Powell. She's on leave. And the last one is from Honorable Maimani. He's attending another Portfolio Committee meeting, Chair. Today's department delegation is led by the DG. Thank you, Chair.
We are welcoming you, DG Dango. We are
Mr.
aware
Chair?
that you were also part of
Mr. Chair,
yes.
apologies. I did hand in apologies for Honorable Dudu Zile Zuma Zambudla. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Honorable Douglas. The apology is noted and welcomed. I was saying that we have seen you, DG, also being part of the process to ensure a smooth transition in as far as G20 chairpersonship handover process is concerned between Brazil and South Africa. What makes it unique is that in the history of humankind, it is for the first time that you have a member of the developing South, also a member of a new phenomenon called handing over to another.
So you need to download, go download Zoom and then gain your password.
Yeah, if you want, but I could never you can just.
You can continue, Chair. I've muted colleagues that were speaking, Chair.
I was saying that it's unprecedented in the history of humankind that you have a developing country handing over to another developing country as part of the South-to-South relations. And a new phenomenon in the form of BRICS has emerged, within which that phenomenon, there's a handover from one member of BRICS to another. So this is an unprecedented development which future generations will surely benefit a lot from. And hopefully future generations and current generations will embrace, so that we can build a better humanity within a better Africa and a better world. I'm handing over to you, DG, so that you do the presentation, after which members of the Portfolio Committee will engage the presentation.
Good morning, Honorable Chair, and good morning, honorable members of the committee. Thank you, Chair, for the introduction on the G20. Indeed, it was a significant moment. And as the Sherpa, I think that we need to commend Brazil for the manner in which they conducted this particular presidency, and there's a lot we can learn from them. Back to the issue at hand. Today, we're presenting the impact assessment, and we're presenting it for a period of 5 financial years, from 2017-18 until 2022-2023. And we know that essentially what the committee had requested us to do before was to do an impact assessment from 2008. But this proved to be very difficult, Chair, because of the cost associated, but also the information would not have been readily available in order to ensure that we do a proper impact assessment. And the company that did the independent impact assessment also advised us on that. We now have a lot more stability in the ARF. but we did have a lot of instability before in terms of the secretariat, and that did compound the ability. The ability to keep proper record keeping. But I think that the report that was done, and we did engage with the company, was well done from our perspective. And it was good that it was an independent assessment and not something that we did ourselves. What the company did was they looked at a total of 23 projects during the review period, and looked at issues from the impacts from high to medium. And the focus was really on Africa. Most of the projects for the period under review was between sort of contracts and bilateral aid between South Africa and mostly African countries, and a few projects had a multilateral focus. So the presentation which Ms. Sempo, who is now the ARF Head of Operations, and this is her second presentation to the Portfolio Committee, will outline the main impacts of the ARF projects during the period under review. It will talk about the achievements, it will talk about the enablers, but also the inhibitors that were identified. In our discussion with the company, we did say that this is almost a formative type of evaluation. Formative in the sense that it gives us the kinds of pointers on how to establish a better institution in the form of SACPA, because the issues that they've identified will really help us to do that. So we have noted the details of the report. We've circulated the report and the presentation to members, and I will now hand over to Ms. Sempo to do the detailed presentation. With your permission, Chair.
Good morning, honorable members, honorable chair, and thank you, DG, for the opening remarks. Indeed, DG, we will be presenting the impact assessment report for the ARF projects, which assesses the work that the fund has done in the continent and also other countries. Moving into slide number 2, it just gives the outline of the presentation structure. And I would like to jump into slide number 3. That speaks to the fact that this assessment was conducted by the independent service provider with a group of experts. Additionally to the appointment of the service provider, we had a project steering committee, which was chaired by the head of the ARF Secretariat. And we also had representatives from Treasury under GTEC, which sat as part of those meetings where we provided oversight and provided necessary responses to ensure that the process for impact assessment runs smoothly and we are able to come and report to the committee respectively. Then going into slide 4, we now saying what was the project scope for impact assessment? What was the desired outcomes from the impact assessment? Firstly, the first desired outcome was to say the work that we did, the project outcomes, can we link them to the ARF Act objectives? When we speaking to ARF objectives, we're speaking to humanitarian assistance, just to name a few, democracy and good governance and prevention of conflict. Secondly, the second aspect for this assessment looked to say, how is ARF used as a tool to achieve the foreign policy? As ARF, we are supporting branches within the department to enhance and achieve their planned foreign policy initiative. So that was taken into account by the service provider, and we had to clearly demonstrate and link it to the projects that were funded. Thirdly, it looked into enablers. What is it that makes our work easier and easier to do and compliant in doing so? And it also looked at inhibitors, which I will also look to, which will speak in detail with the recommendations that were provided out of this assessment. Lastly, it provided the recommendations which we need to look into and develop a plan and speak to how we're going to improve and turn around the narrative and the way in which ARF as a fund operates. I will skip slide number 5. The DG has already covered slide number 5 as part of his remarks, but go and spend some time on slide 6 on the methodology. The impact assessment has various approaches. There's a cost-intensive approach that can be adopted. That means that you need to do verification, go on site, and also see the existence of some of the projects. But we had to take into account that some of the projects was provision of food security, which were closed during this period. So the verification there will be limited. Then secondly, there's a less cost-intensive assessment. Here, we relying more on the work that was done, oversight report, interviews with implementing agent, interviews with project owners, which are different branches from DERCO. And this is the approach that was adopted, Chairperson, in this assessment. And then it had to be rated. You will see as I go further in the report, I speak to different ratings. We have a low rating of impact, which means that we did not achieve what the project outcomes were, or the project did not really cater for a significant number of beneficiaries. Then we have medium impact, which says to some extent we have complied with the outcomes, but however the coverage thereof was limited, and sustainability, which is coming across in this report as an issue, is questionable because we could not demonstrate how sustainability is rolled after project implementation. Then we have a rating of 7, which is medium to high, and a rating of 8 to 10, which is high, which is where most of our projects were rated. Here, the assessment has demonstrated to say most of the ARF projects covered a significant amount of beneficiaries, but in terms of sustainability, that's where the fund is struggling to say upon and conclusion of the project, how do they go beyond? And just to note to the honorable members, sustainability also has cost implications. So with the financial constraints that we face, it will be quite difficult for the fund to commit to long-term sustainability, but we need to look into projects that at least can guarantee Africa sustainability beyond project completion. Then lastly, we have unrated projects. This you will see, Honorable Chair, as I go further, it's only 2 projects that we were saying are unrated. And the reason for that is because these projects are not complete, they are still underway, and they will have to be catered for in the next impact assessment for the period. We can move to slide number 8, which I will take with slide number 9. Chair, as the DG has explained, we have assessed 23 projects. The total budget, which is what we call concurrence in the ARF Act for this project, was 972 million. But however, what we have dispersed to this project is 577 million. What this means that it means that what was committed or budgeted for, we did not disperse all of it. There are various reasons on why we do not disperse all of the money, because there's also some oversight. There's also some compliance criteria that the ARF Secretariat, we need to confirm. And also there's a need to confirm whether the project is still relevant. So if we are in the process of implementing a project and we identify that the need for the project is no longer there, then we rescind the project. Hence, the disbursements are less than what was budgeted for. And the money is taken back and surrendered to the surplus at National Treasury. And when you're looking into this project, honorable members, we can confirm that the report says they have significantly addressed social issues like governance, disaster relief, political instability. And the conclusion was made by the service provider that all the projects were aligned to the ARF objectives in line with the ARF Act. But however, what the service provider is raising is that a significant distribution of funding was towards humanitarian aid assistance, which is at 76%. And our response to that, we're saying ARF is a responsive tool if requests that we receive from countries are requesting humanitarian aid assistance, that is the projects that ARF will be funding. But however, the service provider in their report, they are also speaking about the proactive approach, but there's also an ownership that we need to get from the recipient country and not necessarily dictate what the countries need, but however, it's a consultative process, and based on that, we provide what is needed. And moving into slide 10, which now speaks to linking this to the foreign policy objectives. And as an instrument, did we achieve what the foreign policy needs to achieve? Honorable members, I can confirm that all the 23 projects that were assessed and funded strengthened bilateral relations in the continent. Secondly, we can confirm that 8 of those projects contributed towards promotion of peace, stability, and good governance in Africa. Here we're speaking about projects like the Lesotho Peace Process, just to name a few. And thirdly, humanitarian assistance, which was provided to South Sudan and Sahrawi refugees, contributed to the post-conflict reconstruction and the development which is aligned to the foreign policy objectives. And our contribution to the COVID-19 initiatives to assist African countries enhance the African unity and the integration. And last but not least, the service provider has noted South Africa's contribution and participation in the SADC election observer mission and our role also in the Lesotho peace process, and that demonstrated strengthening the regional integration. And lastly, one of our legacy projects is the ARF, the Guinea Rice Project, where communities were equipped with technical skills for rice production, which also addressed sustainability, promoted social economic development in Africa, which was one of the projects that were rated high. And on the next slide, the slide of main impacts on project, then the service provider goes into detail to say, in terms of the rating of 100%, how do we rate the projects? 34.8% of the projects were rated high. This means that the project deliverables and the impact is directly linked. This further means that we had sustainability into those projects. This is projects like humanitarian assistance linked to farming. Those are the projects that linked high for the ARF. Then 30.4% of the projects were rated medium to high. This means that there is a link between the deliverables and the outputs and the planned scope, but furthermore, sustainability was not catered fully. So that's why 30.4% of those projects was rated medium to high. Then we speaking to medium now and saying 17.4% of the projects are linked as medium. But there's no sustainability plan, but there's other factors that are beyond the ARF controls that were taken into consideration into this assessment. For example, honorable members, I will make an example with the funding of the CAR elections. The service provider in the assessment took into account how many people participated in the voting process. That is beyond the ARF. South Africa contributed to the provision of the equipment. But however, if we are assessing impact, we need to see how it impacted the recipient of those countries. And where there were limitations, that's where we were ranked now into the 17%. Then we had projects that are low, which is quite concerning, but also the projects that were low, it's projects that were disrupted during the COVID pandemic. For example, there was a project for training of the CAR police who we transported to South Africa, but due to lockdown, we had to make arrangements to have them before the lockdown return back home. Therefore, we can't measure totally and fully the impact of the project. Then lastly, we have the 2 projects that are still in progress, which could not be concluded. But overall, above 65% of the projects for ARF for the period were rated medium to high, which was also, I think, highlighted as a service provider as a key milestone and a good achievement for the department. Honorable members, then going to slide 16, the impact assessment speaks to secondary impacts, which is a sensitive discussion because secondary impact says, ARF, you funded projects, and after funding projects, did we have a flow of economic benefits to the South African economy, which poses a challenge. Out of the disbursements of 577 million, we could confirm that 329 million came back to the South African economy. And how that is confirmed, it's based on the fact that we went on tender, service providers were appointed, and based on that, an assumption is made that there was income generation that can be linked to job creation. But however, for transfers that we did to different bodies like the AU and the EU, we can demonstrate that fact. But the service provider is of the view that as ARF, we need to tighten our controls and be in a position to dictate the flow of economic benefits back to the South African market. And then I'm moving into slide 17, which depicts a concerning picture on our monitoring and evaluation mechanism. This slide says our closeout or monitoring reports in some cases were not detailed. This slide also says we were not consistent in how we did our monitoring and evaluation. Because for projects that we implemented as the ARF Secretariat, for example, humanitarian assistance Zimbabwe, there's more oversight. There's also more visibility for South Africa. That means that accountability also will have increased. But for projects that we funded through the AU, our monitoring and evaluation mechanism have really dropped, and the accountability aspect, we could not respond to in detail on the spending and the projects that were implemented. And this has come as a shortcoming in our report to further say that this is also because of a lack of standard reporting template for monitoring, but also to link it, honorable members, to the issues of capacity, to say, due also to the capacity within the ARF, monitoring and evaluation on certain projects was quite restricted, but also taking into account the restriction during lockdown, which posed a challenge for the Secretariat as well to do a lot of oversight, which resulted in the picture that is projected. Then moving into the slide 18 on enablers, which I will just take at high level. One of the key enablers that were identified was to say the alignment to the foreign policy objective that was achieved. And also the second one was to say, as ARF, we are able to select partners. What this means, it means that if, for example, we are implementing a project related to elections, we will know that we need to partner with the subject matter experts, which is the IEC, and that came highly recommended in the report and acknowledged. And the last one that I would like to touch on is the adherence to supply chain procurement prescripts, which, however, comes as well as inhibitors, because if we are adhering to SCM processes, our response to the crisis and disaster then becomes slow. And the service provider then in the next slide, which is slide 19, says slow response to the request of projects. For example, we have received the request for the Sahrawi refugees following the flood that took place in September, but due to compliance processes and due diligence, we are still in the process to ensure that we deliver and implement a project, and hence that is linked to our audit outcome. But when we're looking and benchmarking with other development agencies, our controls and processes look quite stringent. And as a result, the advisory committee has requested that we need to develop a procurement strategy that is linked to the SCM principle of the country so that we can be more efficient in implementing our projects. And the last inhibitor that I like to touch on is the lack of sustainability on project. For impact assessment standard, sustainability is assessed. But one needs to take into account that as South Africa, we're in a position to enforce sustainability. It costs a lot of money. It might be quite restricted. And also the second question was, how do we also enforce sustainability in cases where there's political instability? So as ARF now, we need to come up with ways on how we will change our model of operation to try and measure our impact and link it to sustainability, even if it means looking into other partnerships with the private sector. Then going into the slide on conclusion, the service provider concludes to say a majority of the project were medium to high, which is the 65% that I've just spoken to. And the majority of the projects were aligned to the South Africa's foreign policy. But also what comes out in the discussions that we had is that as South Africa, we need to start leveraging on the projects where we're implementing and have the flow of economic benefits or some of the benefits directly flowing and measure that in a standard template so that we can be able to report and say, for this project that we funded, this is the benefits that South Africa has actually achieved throughout that project. Then the last slide on recommendations, and also to just say to the members, the report contains a number of recommendations, but however, we will still sit and also assess the practicability and also how can we tackle these recommendations and develop an action plan on how we're gonna implement these recommendations. Some of them will not be implemented over a 12-month period. For example, a strong recommendation comes to say the transition into the SADPA will assist with the efficiency of the ARF projects. So that might not be achieved by the end of the financial year, but however, we need to develop a plan. But one of the key recommendations that we've noted is the development of the M&E framework, which we will also further, as the Secretariat, link it to the capacity and creating capacity within the ARF Secretariat with officials that are skilled to do monitoring and evaluation that will enhance and demonstrate accountability for the funds that we've spent. And also to enhance our project proposal template so that it demonstrates the impact of the project and also demonstrate the benefits that South Africa will achieve at the end of the day. And also focus will be on partnerships going into the next strategic plan. We're speaking into partnerships also with the private sector so that we can achieve more visibility, and also in terms of funding, maybe we can find other sources like sponsors to increase the funds that we have as ARF. So, Chair, that is the report for ARF. We have noted the weaknesses thereof, but as the ARF Secretariat, we're saying the report has also opened our eyes away from the audit point of view to say in terms of project, there must be economic benefits, also the impact that we need to assess and have measuring tools on how we implement our project. And following this report, we will then develop an action plan on how we're gonna address all the weaknesses for the betterment of Africa and also to increase the visibility for South Africa in the projects that we're funding. Chairperson, I submit the impact assessment report for ARF. Thank you.
DG, any amplification?
Thank you, Chair. Not much amplification. I think there's two issues to highlight. One is that we are perhaps one of the biggest grant-making institutions on the African continent. And having that status, we may have to also then comply with the Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness. which means that conditionalities are discouraged. We need to align with local priorities, meaning of the recipient countries, and there should be mutual accountability. There's 5, but I think those are the 3 most important. These are generally meant for developing countries giving aid for developed countries giving aid to developing countries, where it has always been what is called tied aid, conditional aid, and we have to make sure that the recommendation on increasing our return on investment, for want of a better word, doesn't lead to conditionalities or lack of alignment with domestic priorities of recipient countries. So I do think it's something that we'll have to consider going forward. I also think that in a nutshell, what is being recommended is that we should become a proactive grant-making institution, not only reactive. And proactiveness is essentially what we can achieve with the establishment of SADPA. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, DG and your team. Honorable members, we can now commence with our engagement. The first speaker of the day will be Honorable Smith, followed by Honorable Muthusi Montweni, followed by Honorable Douglas, followed by Honorable Kumbacha. Honorable
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thank you to Mr. Dangor and the department for the presentation this morning. I'm very encouraged by Mr. Dangor's last comment, where he said that the ARF needs to be more proactive rather than reactive. And that leads into my first question. I'd just like to know from the department, it does seem that the ARF acts in a very reactive manner. I know that there's a lot of humanitarian assistance that's provided to African states, which obviously is unplanned for. But in terms of the ARF's mandate to secure good governance, is this being supplemented or complemented by diplomatic efforts to promote democracy, which really is the bedrock, I think, of good governance and stability on the continent? And I think that we need to look at certain countries that are sort of repeat recipients of funding from the ARF and check to see whether there's no diplomatic approach that we can take there as well, to really ensure that we are not just treating the symptoms, but the cause of the problem. That's my first question. Then secondly, in the previous term, there was talk of the ARF being amended by means of legislation to become the South African Development Partnership Act. What is the status of that in the new term? And can the department give us any details as to whether or not this process will continue? And whether they foresee a legislative timeline of Parliament in this regard. And then my final question pertains to a response that we received to a parliamentary question from my colleague, the Honourable Powell, which was on the 25th of October, where we asked which non-African countries were receiving aid from the ARF. And we were informed that 4 countries were receiving assistance, namely Palestine, Syria, Turkey, and Cuba. I think the geographic mandate of the ARF is self-explanatory. It lies in the very title of the Act and certainly in the preamble. Can the department please explain why this Act is giving aid to countries that are outside of the African region or off the African continent, given that this Act is only meant for humanitarian aid here in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Smith. Honorable Montweni.
Madume, everyone in the meeting. Chair, just 3 or 4 on my side is that, can the DG take us through maybe just a brief in terms of the 2009 cabinet resolution on having the ARF to operate as a full entity of the department, to say what is the status thereof and how will this assist in terms of building the necessary capacity that the presenter did speak about now currently, that the ARF actually needs to build that necessary capacity. I'm referring also, when I speak about that capacity, in terms of what she said about the lack of standard reporting template, which cited the capacity within the RARF. So I'm checking that 2009 cabinet resolution, how will it help in terms of bridging that was identified as capacity that is needed within the ARF? And then, sorry? Okay. And then, Chair, the other thing is that how do we ensure that we create sustainability beyond completion of projects that are being actually implemented? And is it fair to implement projects that will not be sustainable beyond any completion like that, Chair? Now, the other thing, Chair, is that the lady spoke about the economic benefit after implementing the project. Now, my question is, how do we ensure that each and every project that, every rand that we spend, not necessarily, but to some extent, we need to make sure that there are benefits. So how do we ensure that going forward, projects that are implemented, we derive economic benefit on those projects? Now, this report that we are receiving today about the impact report, how often is this report prepared? Because if this report could be, prepared as often as possible, it will actually assess the department to see if there are any impacts that they are making through the implementation of this report. And how are you planning in the future to make sure that there is actually the impact report so that it must guide the department going forward? Lastly, Chair, this is actually, after what the last honorable member has raised. I wanted to say to the department to say that the struggles of the people of the Palestinians, we must never shy away from going there and assisting those people of the Palestinian who for the longest period have, been subjected to this by the Israelis. We don't need any justification for us to go and bring humanitarian assistance to the people of Palestine. They are in need of assistance. If we see fit that we must go and assist them, we must assist them. No piece of legislation must stay on our way for us to go and ensure that we see justice happening in that space of the world. Thank you very much, Modula Stilo. Thank you very much.
Honorable Montoy. Honorable Datlas.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Saitses, and goeiemôre almal. Reflecting on your earlier comments, Mr. Chair, at the start of the meeting, indeed, the global geopolitical landscape is at a critical juncture, marked by escalating conflicts and shifting alliances. As MK, we remain resolute in advocating for a pro-Pan-African non-aligned stance that prioritizes peace, justice, and the welfare of the global South. Like you, Mr. Chair, while we welcome a ceasefire announcement by President Joe Biden, the continued bombing in Gaza and Lebanon underscores the urgent need for immediate action to halt aggression and prioritize human rights, especially since the genocide against the oppressed Palestinian people in Gaza has not stopped. So peace without stopping the genocide is not going to help us. So as South Africa, our posture needs to be, we need to stop the genocide at all costs. It's a war crime. It's been ruled on in the ICC. We need, and the ICJ, and we need to make sure that we as a country take a stand against this. Similarly, we condemn NATO's and United States' reckless escalation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, including the deployment of long-range missiles that cross lines threatening global security. History will judge their aggression harshly as it pushes us closer to a brink of a world war. In contrast, MK stands firmly with BRICS and the global South, advocating for a just multilateral order that prioritizes the needs of the poor. Turning to the African Renaissance Fund, we question its failure to demonstrate accountability and its misaligned priorities in addressing the real needs of South Africans and Africans at large. Below are our most pressing questions to the Minister in our hearts and in our minds, we want to find out how does the ARF justify spending 58% of project budgets on logistics and administration when communities across Africa and South Africa are starving and millions are displaced. Given the lack of close-out reports for 65% of ARF-funded projects, does this not indicate a systemic failure to monitor and account for public funds? And how does DIRCO allowed the situation to persist, and how are you going to address it? Why is it that millions were spent on projects such as the Guinea Rice Project, while South African Black and Aboriginal indigenous farmers and rural communities continue to suffer with no funding and land and agricultural support, especially during our own drought and natural, our own droughts and natural disasters? What does the department say to accusations that ARF funds are used as diplomatic vanity projects with little tangible benefit to African or South African citizens? Because that's exactly what the facts before us says. It's not really getting down to grass stats. I especially want to raise the issue around how do we ensure that its humanitarian aid programs align with Pan-African priorities, such as Agenda 2063, and serve the needs of the poorest and most marginalized communities? And then how does the ARF supported the African Continental Free Trade Area to address the economic challenges faced by African countries? Or does the fund only respond to disasters and political crisis? Our SMMEs here at home need support and access to African markets, and the ARF is not helping that at all. We need to create jobs. We need to create access to markets for our businesses so that we can export our products to our neighbors. Why has DIRCO also failed to leverage ARF-funded projects to promote African self-reliance, such as supporting local vaccine production instead of importing overpriced COVID-19 supplies? When will the minister also table a detailed report in Parliament showing how ARF projects have directly benefited poor South Africans? So there's a number of issues that I wanted to raise today, Mr. Chair, because we need to really look at how do we change these programs to suit and become fit for purpose for South African people. We must be involved with the African continent. We must be working and helping our neighbors, but we also in the same process can have a win-win relationship where we benefit our people and the people of the continent in a pro-poor Africa and Pan-African vision. So I thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to ask these questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Douglas. Honorable Andisiwe Kumbaka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to yourself, and honorable members, DG and the department, officials from the department. Firstly, my chair is to welcome the report and also commend the intention to set recommendations in place since the department has identified the shortfalls or shortcomings rather. But I do want to suggest that they need to attach timelines in the recommendations to ensure effectiveness, and so that we are also able to monitor the pace of the recommendations set. And I also think in attaching the monitoring systems, they also need to attach evaluating systems to ensure the success of the actual fund. And lastly, I just want to encourage the department to impose conditions to certain states they are assisting and ensure that they're in line with our foreign policy values. And some states that are being assisted do not participate in human rights violations and war crimes in Africa. I think they need to find a way to impose certain conditions if they are not in place already. But that is all from my side, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Honorable Kumbaka. Honorable Shamimo.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Good morning to all. Assalamu alaikum. I do believe that my honorable colleagues has covered me to a large extent. I just want to reiterate the situation that we are faced with globally surrounding the genocides that's not just being committed in Gaza, but in Congo as well as Kashmir, as well as we have challenges with regard to the Uyghur as well. So there is definitely political games at play and games worldwide at play, which is impacting the most vulnerable. So yes, we have noted that there's a request for ceasefire, but we all know that that ceasefire is definitely not going to be sustainable. Number one, as correctly pointed out by honorable colleagues, we need an end to the genocide that is currently happening. With regard to our own country, I must admit that with regard to the ICJ case, it's all good and well, but when you're dealing with an entity who has no respect for the law, and it's basically showing the law the middle finger, what steps do you take in that type of situation? Furthermore, I have noted, and I would just like to put this on record, when last has the portfolio of international relations visited the area of Palestine and surrounds? And I do believe that that is way overdue. I note the recommendations made by international relations, and I agree with Honorable Becker with regard to the importance of timelines and deadlines, which is always appearing to be lacking in government. This is crucial if we are going to go anywhere, that timelines and deadlines be provided and that updates are provided surrounding these issues. Honorable Chair, the rest of my concerns has already been covered. I do not want to go ad nauseum with regard to the information. I thank the department for the presentation, but there's much more to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Advocate Shamimo. DG, because this is a noble, in my view, necessary, noble global cause for humanity, I want to suggest that as we navigate the processes of creating SADBA out of ARF, we consider inserting a clause that gives an opportunity to multinationals, other businesses throughout the world, individuals and philanthropists to make contributions in kind to this noble cause, so that those who agree with the agenda being pursued by ARF in future SADBA can have a platform through which they can also assist for this noble global cause for the betterment of humanity. Remember that in South Africa, and nobody has objected to that posture over the last 30 years, it is our collective commitment to build a better Africa and a better world. So for me, ARF to become SADBA is a tool through which we seek to achieve our strategic objective of building a better Africa and a better world. Therefore, all and sundry, in my view, should be crystal clear that when we all agree that we need to build a better Africa and a better world, it is logical to find our footprint as South Africa and Africa in other parts of the world, because we have agreed that we seek to build a better Africa and a better world. That is my first proposal. The second one, I think it will be prudent for South Africa as part of engaging in geopolitics to talk to the United Nations and say to the UN, we have a platform in South Africa which seeks to build a better Africa and a better world, called ARF to become SADBA, through which you as the United Nations, we think and we propose strongly that there should be collaboration between South Africa as a sovereign state, all other progressive states that may want to assist and contribute to the strengthening of ARF to become SADBA, they may feel more comfortable to do it through the United Nations and its ancillary relevant bodies. That provision based on a discussion between us as a progressive state and the United Nations through Mr. Guterres, that we have those discussions. So that's my second proposal, that we explore that possibility so that at the United Nations Assembly level, including the Security Council, everybody can appreciate that it's not just in theory that South Africa says that it seeks to build a better Africa and a better world, but we have an existing tool through which we seek to achieve that strategic objective. That's proposal number 2. Number 3, in the same vein, I think South Africa should impress upon BRICS countries, because the BRICS countries are committed to also building a better Africa and a better world through the state-to-state relations and through collaboration among the BRICS nations. That BRICS must begin to see and appreciate the existence of this entity as a platform through which they themselves as BRICS can assist not only to build a better Africa, but they themselves to build a better world through SADBA, but in the context of the BRICS nations, so that we broaden much further and deepen the operations of the future SADBA to become a platform through which BRICS member states can contribute concretely to building a better Africa and a better world. So that in future, any future notion that seeks to adopt a narrow approach of us looking at only our situation as a nation, as a continent, that no future notion must be dealt with by the reality, objective reality, that a body like BRICS will have appreciated the importance of SADBA as a future entity through which a better Africa and a better world can be created. So I suggest that in our engagements with the BRICS countries, we need to do that. Lastly, my suggestion is that because the G20 is coming here, one of the platforms we can use, it is that platform, to insert within the discussions of G20 a necessity for them to deepen their efforts as the G20 to build all-round peace and harmony in Africa in the context of building a better Africa and a better world. And therefore, in the declaration of the G20, it might be helpful for us to emerge with a posture that says we as the G20, we appreciate the existence of this entity, its strategic location, and the logic embedded in that entity, and therefore commit as G20 countries that we will, without blinking, support the initiative of building a better Africa and a better world through the future SADBA now. ARF. I think as part of broadening our footprint as a country, as a continent globally, these proposals will help us in ensuring that we deepen the intended impact to be made by ARF migrating to become SADPA. And I don't think that the AU will be indifferent to that development in as far as them having appreciated what South Africa is doing through that fund, working with SADC, the AU itself, and other regional bodies in the continent. Over to you, the DG.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, honorable members. Chair, if you don't mind, I'll start with your questions and then move back in that way, because I think the manner in which you've put it frames some of the issues that have emerged in some of the other questions. The framing of the SADPA Act in its draft, but it's also in the current ARF Act, focuses on African states, but it also makes explicit provision to support states outside of Africa. We are trying to strengthen the wording in the current SADPA Act. But of course, the focus will be on Africa, but it doesn't mean that we cannot support other countries in need. The establishment of SADPA helps us to do this, because what you will need to do this kind of work is a more proactive perspective where we define, as you pointed out, what is our strategic objectives? How do we build a better Africa and a better world? What are the key issues that we need to be funding? How do we fund them? What program officers do we need to have on board? And this was the vision, as Honorable Mankwedi asked, the vision of the 2009 Cabinet Instruction. And in fact, I think it was about 2012, I may be wrong, my colleagues can correct me. There was an advert for a CEO for SADPA. And that process was then abandoned around about that time. And we're trying to resurrect it. Because we do need this kind of institution. We do need to have the institution that can allow us to be as proactive as you are suggesting, Chair. The SADPA is an instrument for soft power, which means it's how do we use the resources that we have to influence the way others think and behave. So it's not conditionalities, but it's about using soft power to advance our values. And I think the better Africa and a better world, and particularly a peace-focused one. And peace-focused will then also include the issues that was raised by Honorable Smith about good governance, better governance, so that some of those issues are also dealt with. And I think that's why the establishment of SADPA is so important. I think it's important to point out when we say it's an instrument of soft power, it means that our focus is external. It is external because there are other institutions domestically, other government departments that have a mandate to deal with the domestic crises that we have. Obviously, we need to add on to that by having a more stable Africa, more stable SADC. We create the conditions for better businesses. We create the conditions for the AFCFTA to be operationalized. So it's early days, but this is the aim of SADPA. And of course, there are opportunities to use this to leverage local benefit. And we do that through the humanitarian projects. But at times, that local procurement does delay the process. So you've got to provide emergency care issues, water, medicines to a country, and then be procured domestically. And often that has delayed the process. So I'm just putting out the real challenges, and my colleagues can add in to that. So so with that kind of approach, we can then shape, in terms of soft power, the issues that you're talking about, Chair. The SADPA Act does make provision, and we must just make sure that we haven't lost it in the drafting, for raising funds from outside of the fiscus. Because one of the constraints we have is that we constantly have to raise funds from the fiscus, then we have to ask for rollovers. And to be a proper grant-making institution, we need a consistent, sustainable flow of funds, and also to build an endowment. An endowment in most development agencies have an endowment function where there's a pot of money that is invested, That capital is hardly touched, but it just means that in an emergency, you can use and tap into that, but it raises the ability to sustainably fund projects on a multi-year basis. So I do think that approach, and it also allows for partnership building with as you pointed out, with the UN. And I'm just going to point out, the UN has got a peace building fund. And we've just managed to get one of our former ambassadors and staff members of DIRCO appointed to be on the advisory board of that peace building fund, Basu Sango. And I will engage with him to ensure that the issues of SADPA is put on that agenda to assess to what extent we can support the peace building fund as we establish SADPA. So I do think that it's an important point that you're making there, Chair. And obviously the partnerships with other BRICS countries and G20 countries is important. It's, just on the G20, as you pointed out, aid effectiveness is something that we focus on. One of the big, stumbling blocks in the negotiations is on climate change issues, for example, on who funds climate change. And we've seen the COP basically failing because of those kind of discussions. So it is ideal that with our meager budgets, we can look at to what extent we can leverage on that. We managed to get into the agreement this time, Chair, a resolution that says, this is the era for peace. This is not a time for war. And a complete prohibition on the use or threat of nuclear weapons. Obviously, in the few days following that, we've seen that many G20 countries breach that, but at least we got that into the agreement, which is corresponding to South Africa's foreign policy, and also countries like Brazil and others who are part of G20. And we can then use this to build onto the partnerships of the G20 and look at what we can do in our region around, a peace-centered approach. I do think that, the way you've put the issues has summed up many of the issues, but let me just go back to the questions as they were asked and to make sure that we haven't left anything out. So I think I've answered the question on the proactiveness that Honorable Smith asked, and also on the SADPA status. So we have tabled, as you would know, Chair, we did table it during the last administration. We've now tabled it twice, and despite the negotiations that took place and the consultations, there were some issues with National Treasury, which sent it back. So we are just reworking some of those issues. And it's mostly around whether we need a board or not a board for SADPA. So it's those governance issues, and it's not big issues, and we can fix that rather quickly, but my colleagues can fix this. I think I've answered the question on the why we supporting other countries, because the current act does allow us to do that. Then Honorable Montwedi, I think you asked the question on the 2009 cabinet resolution, and as I pointed out with the chair summary, this is exactly what was envisaged. I don't know why it was delayed, but we're really trying to implement this because it really will allow us to do what we need to do from a proactive stance and in line with our foreign policy objectives and the soft power that we hope that this can achieve, the influence that we can get through this. Sustainability, I spoke about the co-funding. The co-funding and the SADPA Act makes provision for that. Some projects, if it's emergency situations, we may not be able to do sustainability issues, and we need to look at that. And humanitarian projects are rather costly. It's logistics heavy, and often we need to choose the institutions that have the lowest logistics costs. So, we could say that at times we need to work through the World Food Program or UNICEF or local institutions, but the cost of trucking, the purchasing of medicines, those are the logistics costs that in any humanitarian project is quite expensive. But obviously we take the point of trying to get a certain ratio, the colleagues can work on what that appropriate ratio should be, so that it's not logistics, too logistics heavy. And then I think also I mentioned the issue about the evaluation pointed out the weaknesses on our current M&E processes. And we need the capacity to do this so that we can monitor on a regular basis. And that requires the kind of staffing and program officers to do that. And we will do monitoring and do some evaluative reports, but every 3 years, we do need an outside perspective to do an impact assessment about, is our own monitoring and evaluation objective? Is it talking, is it talking really the reality between what we're finding and the objectives? Is it in line? So I do think that we will do that. I think the point that was raised about Palestine and others I've answered, and you've also answered that through your own summary, Chair. I think that the Honorable Douglas, I just wanted to make the point again that, it is soft power. So of course we must focus on some of our domestic priorities, but that's not our main mandate. Our main mandate is the external focus. And obviously we need to work with institutions that look at what happens at the domestic level. And oftentimes those are NGOs and other state departments that look at emergencies at the domestic level. So we will work with them. On for example, other work that has been done. So we did, finance the provision of vaccines through SADPA, but DIRCO has also been instrumental during the COVID period. So when we chaired what was called the Vaccine Manufacturing Working Group to establish what is called the vaccine manufacturing hubs in South Africa. It was a hard struggle to get developing countries to agree that we can have tech transfer without getting the permission of the companies. So that you'll find that Afrigen and BioVac have been supported through the work that DIRCO has been doing with the Department of Health on establishing the ability for South Africa to produce life-saving vaccines and children's vaccines without necessarily looking to import this, because security of supply was what shocked us during the COVID period. We had money to buy vaccines, but we just couldn't purchase them because of vaccine nationalism. So we have done this through other diplomatic means, but of course we can look at how do we enhance that through the SADPA processes going forward, where we invest in those hubs a bit more, strengthen the hubs, but also at some point look at, there's a training hub which was part of the same process, which is in East Africa. How do we support that training hub? Because we basically responsible for the actual production, but the training is also important on this. I think the Honorable Kumbaka, the humanitarian support and the issues on evaluations, I think I have answered that, and we need to strengthen those. Honorable Sali, on the geopolitical issues, I also answered that in terms of the soft power and the ability to support other countries in crisis and the most vulnerable across the world. And Chair, I think then I answered a lot of your issues that you've raised as a means of framing the other questions. And let me just ask my colleagues if there's anything that I've missed out. Do you want to amplify?
Thank you, DG. DG, you have answered. I think the only issue was on how can we ensure direct link with economic benefits. And that the plan for achieving that, it means that we need to have supply chain processes that are ready to respond. For example, we need to establish panels where we will be able to have panels for our South African companies who will be the tool that will be used to implement these projects abroad. So that is the only aspect. And also lastly, on the free trade agreement, we have not been doing so well, but we are working with the DTIC to try and find mechanisms and projects that will capitalize on the free trade agreement, but by giving exposure to our South African companies to leverage on this agreement and trade in other countries. Thank you, DG.
Brian?
Thank you, DG, and good morning to the committee members and the chairperson. I think, DG, from our side, especially with regards to the SADPA, the establishment thereof, you have covered the progress we've made thus far and where we are. And we've also submitted a response through to the Office of the Deputy President as the leader of government business, where they required, as part of the legislative drafting process, we've been required to give specific timelines of when we'll be expected to present the SADPA bill again. So we have responded in that respect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've answered the questions to the best of our abilities. Over to you.
Thank you very much, DG. Honorable Smith, any pendamzala on your side?
No, I think I'm mostly covered, Chair. I just, as a point of interest, would like to ask, I know that there was a successful court interdict of a fund or funds that were meant to be granted to Cuba last year by AfriForum. I'm not sure. Could the department maybe just elaborate on that? Was that due to the mandates of the Act itself, or was it procedural irregularities? Just in terms of what Mr. Dangor said about the Act allowing for the ARF to assist other countries outside of the African continent, if I could get some clarity on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Datlas, any Pendamzala?
Hi, Mr. Chair. No, I'm covered. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think we must really look at supporting this department more and speaking to the executive and making sure that all their mandates are funded. I think the defunding of DIRCO is what's getting us into a lot of problems in fulfilling these mandates and working on the ARF and SAPCA and other such structures. If we can make sure that we address how we can actually fund these mandates better by executive decision and participation, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Montoya, any Pendamzala? Honorable Kumbaxa, any Pendamzala?
Thanks, Chair. I'm content with the response. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Shamimo, any Pendamzala?
No, I'm covered, Honorable Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. DG?
Thank you, Chair. The injunction was based on procedural matters and not actually on the substantive nature of the act. We can share the actual clause and find it and send it through to you, to the Secretariat, so that it can be shared with the members.
Okay. Is that all?
Yes, and also just to support what Honorable Douglas has said, Chair, I think if we can find ways of ensuring that we are properly funded, and if the Portfolio Committee can help us, we'd be most grateful.
Okay. I want to take this opportunity to thank you. We did receive apologies of the Minister and the Deputy Ministers. The Deputy Minister Moraga is in a meeting with the Vietnamese. We are looking forward to, with bated breath, developments based on what the President of America, elect Trump, has said in as far as tariffs are concerned. In some countries, including China as number one, which means then that the possibility exists that China may have to intensify its efforts to find other progressive markets which may not be adopting the same attitude as the America under Trump will be adopting of exorbitant tariffs. So South Africa, in my view, must stand ready to look at those developments so that matters of our tariffs and visas and so on and other necessary conditions we need to look at in as far as investments are concerned, so that the next 4 years during the reign of the terror administration coming from Trump, South Africa can strategically locate itself as one of the possible investment destinations. Because no, I don't think there's any business that can afford the tariffs that Trump is purporting to be intending to impose. So I hope that in the discussions that are taking place within yourselves as the executive arm of the state, you will be looking at these variables within the geopolitics and see how we position and reposition ourselves as South African as far as those developments are concerned. The other matter relating to Trump, I don't need an answer on that. Will be maybe in future having succeeded in future South Africa, we can then take our nation into confidence in as far as what, in my view, I think it's a possible tactical platform that we can use, because we have a friend who is a confidante to Trump in the form of this the richest guy in the world who comes from Pretoria, Elon Musk. In my view, if there can be what other people don't like, in the context of quiet diplomacy, to engage the South African citizen who enjoys about 70 to 80% of President Trump's ear, to see if we can't use the South African citizen who is enjoying this so much advantage of President Trump's ear to advance our interest as a nation. I think if we can position ourselves in a way that uses that opportunity to our advantage, as South Africa, we will have achieved a lot, because somebody must indicate to Elon Musk that there's an element of patriotism that he must always pursue. Wherever he is on behalf of South Africa, he's not the only one. And the rest of other ambassadors in brackets who are all over the world, who are originating from South Africa. So I'm just saying that there's an opportunity on both sides of the equation, of the tariffs and the equation in as far as this South African who is enjoying unprecedented, overwhelming, positive listening from President Trump. I was a bit surprised, maybe it will happen later, that he did not include Venezuela in his list of casualties to suffer the consequences of him imposing these tariffs on trade. Honorable members, Namibia today is in the elections. We hope they will go well and they will be peaceful, so that SADC can continue to be an example in as far as conducting free, fair, genuine, legitimate, democratic elections are concerned. We want to congratulate DERCO for having people there who are part of the processes to ensure that the elections in Namibia also go very, very, very well. This afternoon, honorable members, there's a sitting, so we will see you there. There's a lot of voting that will be taking place, just like yesterday. I want to thank you for your robust participation in the discussions in this portfolio committee on international relations, the staff from your side as the executive arm of the state, and you, DG, representing so well with your team, both the minister and the deputy ministers of DERCO, our staff from the portfolio committee, for ensuring the smooth transmission and the quality presentations, preparations that were done for this particular engagement. South Africans who always invest their time in making sure that they follow the proceedings of this portfolio committee on how it holds the executive accountable. We also appreciate your time. Please continue to be part of the engagements. Enjoy your afternoon, honorable members. Saman Center. Hambani kahle. Mwebiwo. Baya danki. Ralebo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Bye, everybody.